Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Under the Banner of Heaven. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So this episode, I thought was kind of, does a really good job of kind of giving us, expanding the mystery and kind of explaining like some of the stuff that the Laffertys were going through. Obviously, Dan's, situation of trying to become sheriff, and how that conflated with Dan's attempts to even get a loan, because it's like, right, his brother's up here being anti-tax and stuff like that, and the Mormon church is about following even the laws of man, but Dan's kind of like, no, I'm not paying taxes. He's fighting back against those laws. That's what I think is interesting. Is it just those laws he's fighting against? I mean, once again, the conversation came up last episode about like, oh, are you going to say like everything past the 16th Amendment on? No, he said specifically like everything after the 10th Amendment we don't need. And that's what she was like, 13? That abolished slavery we don't need? So bringing that up. So it seems like his biggest issue seemed to be taxation, but it's hard to say like, are you okay with the rest of the laws of man? Like, it seems like you're very picky about what fight you're picking when it comes to like your fight against like the laws of man. It's that conversation of separation of state and church, and obviously it's like a lot of bumping heads of both sides in this because Dan's trying to make his point clear, and then his dad chastises him. I thought it was kind of weird where he was like, oh, like this lady, she's putting a spell on me. Oh no, what are you making me do? And he kissed him. I'm like, that's kind of weird. I think even Robin was like, hey, come on, Dan. And it's like, oh, now we find out more about what that is. After being chastised by his father about like, right, me and your mom can't go on our missions anymore to like baptize people in Missouri and stuff like that. It's like, no, we need to be here to save our son because you're going down the wrong path. Because he's just, rather than saying like you're not really listening to the voice of our Lord because you're kind of sinning, you're being blasphemous essentially. And so Dan, trying to look more and more into the past of what is the Mormonism, their founder, I believe, Joseph Smith, which I think I might have kept calling him John Smith. I don't know. Maybe I have corrected myself in the past, and maybe I'm just maybe I have been correctly calling him Joseph Smith. But whatever the case may be, a lot of some of the Mormonism's like teachings and stuff have been removed from public history. So him and Robin go and meet fundamentalist Mormons who are kind of like, who lean more towards Dan's perspective on things. And they also lean into polygamy. And you're like, okay. So I was like, okay. So I was like, that's interesting. Because it seems like polygamy has always been a part of Mormonism, like kind of even its early days, but even with like Joseph Smith, but then they kind of got rid of it, I guess, to make it so that, because polygamy was like frowned upon, and it's like, right, at this point in time, the Mormonism that they practice, that Jeb and his family and most people are kind of a part of in this show, are kind of like, I guess, what is now considered probably more traditional Mormonism, but then polygamy is considered it's essentially part of an extremist group. The fundamentalists are seen as the extremist Mormons, and I'm like, that's interesting because once again, my ignorance. I've known polygamy as part of Mormonism, so this show's set in like probably like the 60s or 70s or 80s or something like that. So this is something I'm curious to look into myself, is to find out, has that kind of shifted back over to being just part of Mormonism all around, or is it still like a fundamentalist thing that not every Mormon practices? Because it's an interesting dilemma, like, because Robin was kind of initially against, like, no, we shouldn't have anything to do with the LDS, but Dan was all about it because Dan believed that it's like, right, we're cutting ourselves off from our roots. To be a good leader, I need to basically follow what has always been part of our doctrines, that has been part of our history. So he's trying to go like super old school, It's kind of like, right, if you really want to be the holiest of holy person, like even just from a Christian perspective, it's like, right, you kind of have to live by the standards that are kind of in the Bible. Like if you, on the most extremist level, it's kind of the whole thing. And some people can be extreme about it, and it seems like Dan is trying to do that. And so now he's even suggesting to his wife Matilda, like, oh, we should bring other people into it. You know, Joseph Smith had 33 wives. I was like, Jesus. And it's like, she's like, wait, don't use this as an excuse just to get with other women just because you're bored of me. And he was like, basically saying, we can't get into heaven unless I have more than one wife. I'm like, that seems so wild. And especially from her perspective, it's like, you're just justifying bringing more people into the relationship, and it's like, right. Because for her, it's like, don't make it seem like it's some religious thing. You're only practicing this because, but for him, it's like, no, like, don't you see, I'm not only doing this for me so I can get in heaven, I'm doing this for you. I'm like, I don't see how you're doing this for her. But once again, I am ignorant to all the teachings of Mormonism. And, and that's kind of the whole point in this episode too, of like, right, outsiders, like, the Mormon community has done, at least, as we kind of touch on in this episode, that they've tried to steer away from the more FLDS perspectives, especially like the polygamy angle to it. They've tried to because that's frowned upon, I think, in the law, as well as just their, just the natural law, it's kind of frowned upon, and just the outsiders. And from inside that community, they've tried to the LDS have tried to steer away from that because it is associated with the FLDS. I mean, that's why it's been probably stricken from so many records. Even though it's a huge Mormon community, and the reason why that's been stricken from their doctrines and stuff like that, because there's certain, once again, you can see that they are doing their best to hide away from some of the more aspects about their religion's past that they're not too proud of, because the LDS straight up getting that nasty territory of, yeah, you're taking on women that are as young as teenagers, and you're like, okay. And that's when Emma found out what was what, because she didn't know, because she thought, oh, he's being persecuted because of being a Mormon. But it's like, oh, no, there's other practices they are getting on him about. And it's that, because Alan had made comparison to the fact is that he kind of was kind of initially going with the flow of things, but even he kind of started leaning towards Emma's perspective on things, because it is right, you're trying to take in other wives is one thing, but taking in other wives, including children, it's because you also get into that creepy territory of yeah, that's happened in the past, where it's people would take wives as young as teenagers like that, and it just seems so baffling that was a thing in history at all, not just in this circumstance, but just in history in general. And so Emma frowned upon it, and she's like, all right, don't, basically kind of the same fight that's going on present day in the show, it was kind of being had by Emma back then. It's oh, don't try and justify that you're just bored with me trying to say oh, you want other wives. It's okay, so how about I take on other husbands then? And then what does Joseph do? He prays, oh, the Lord is speaking through me. Basically, you shall have no one but your husband, and if you break this, you shall be destroyed. She's like, what? The Holy Father will destroy me. And it's dude, come on. That's messed up. That's you're oh, I'm praying. Oh, the Lord's speaking to me. No, you can't have other husbands. I'm the only one that can have other partners, and the Lord will destroy you if you do that. I'm do you not? That's wild that he said that right before. You could tell the look on her face. Did you just? Oh, you just happened to speak. The Lord just happened to speak through you and just say that exact. Okay. You could tell how frustrated Elma was. You could tell how frustrated present day Matilda was dealing with Dan, who the cops pull him over, and he's oh, I get it, you guys are coming after me because of my run for sheriff. And they're just all right, get out of the car. And he's right, you guys are worried that the moment I become sheriff, I'm going to basically do away with some of this stuff. But it's right, you can't handle the competition. And so he ends up the cops try to pull him out of his car. He drives away, turns into a whole chase, and he makes a whole spectacle of it. It's see, watch these, witness these people basically abuse their power. And for Matilda, it's just kind of it's not the man she married anymore. Dan's kind of been going off the deep end for a while now, and he slowly but surely has dragged his other brothers through it. Sam is a part of it, so is Robin. There's Ron, and then there's also Alan, but there's also their other brother. I'm like, we don't know where he stands in all this because we only hear the others talk. He's the only one that's super quiet. We never like hear his perspective on things. I think maybe he just kind of like, right, he follows what the others suggest. That's why I'm kind of almost leaning towards, I think he might be the one that ended up killing Brenda and her baby. I think we're going to find he's a quiet and silent type. Like, I think that's going to be where that goes. Because this all started because Jeb and Bill found a letter that Diana, Ron's wife, sent to the bishop. And it's like, right, their place is tossed and it's kind of messed up. And it's like, okay, what happened here? Turns out Diana sent a letter basically talking to the prophet, which is essentially being like, yo, it's like talking to the Lord himself, being like, yeah, I'm kind of worried about the Lafferty brothers. They kind of seem kind of out there with the way they're handling things, and because of that, Ron couldn't get the loan he needed, and the guy that was, that Jeb ended up talking to was like, oh, no, don't even worry about that. Ron wasn't mad at his wife. The person he was really mad at was Dan. So, but when Dan got locked up, he spoke to his brothers about, like, this is what we need to be, and Ron, the only reason why you're not leading us is because father's growing sicker and weaker, and he knows that he couldn't stand up to your strength. That's why he won't give you the position of head. But we all know you're the strong one. You're the true leader of this. Like, you have to pick up the mantle. You have to handle this going forward, brother. So, and like, he's like, right, do any of you disagree? And it's like, right, Ron's like, okay, and has all his brother's support. Obviously, Jeb ends up talking to Alan present day, and he's because it turns out the letter that Diana sent wasn't written by her. It was written by Brenda. Because they obviously knew that Brenda I think it was even Robin who had said, like, oh, they know that Brenda had to be at the heart of that. Because it's like, right, she's the one that's kind of, it's like, oh, how dare she give our wives voices. But essentially, Alan could read the letter, and he knew it was he could hear Brenda's voice through it. And for him, he's like, Brenda knew I could never stand up to my brothers, and because of that, she's the one that did the standing. And I think it's the thing of regret. It's like, maybe if I did more back then, maybe, he's had so many regrets about how this is all played out. It's like, if I kept her away from my family, because he thought, like, oh, I thought she tossed her hands in the air and was done with me. She stopped complaining about my brother, so I thought she just became, I think he thought maybe she just accepted things and was just complacent, was just like, was done with me, was done with my brothers. But for him, it's like, no, she still loved me because she knew I wasn't all about this, and she decided, because I couldn't stand or wouldn't stand, she stood for me to stand against my brothers in the direction that they were going. So, and it's wild because Robin brings in, what is it, their stake president, I believe is what he's called, and he's like, oh, like, release him into my custody. I'm like, what? He's like, no. And all that you're going through, like, oh, you must be going through stuff at home. I heard about your mom and everything, because Bishop Lowe, I think, ended up talking to him about, you're like, oh, okay, about, like, everything you're going through with your mom. Obviously, like, everything about the children still not being baptized and stuff, so I thought that was fascinating. And him just kind of being like, at first, he's just kind of being, like, very subtle about it. He's like, no, give them to me. But it's like, I'm sorry, like, we could talk private. He's like, no, we should talk out here because a lot of everyone else there are Mormons as well. Because the only one that seems like they might be a non-Mormon is Bill. I think everyone else in that department seems to be one. And so that's why he wanted to, like, oh, you want to try and have a private conversation away from him. It's like, no, you want to have this conversation, we have it in front of everyone, because that way he can have people in the office kind of sway more his side and kind of put Jeb in a very uncomfortable position. And so Jeb's like, right, I can't let them go. This isn't just about, and it isn't just about, like, them fighting against laws. This is about murder. And then what does the stake president say? He's like, sometimes we have to lay down our life. And you're like, okay. And now the whole, just like that, he flipped on a dime. That like, that friendly face turned sour. And he was like, this is what you're going to do. But Jeb wouldn't back down, because it's like, no, these are murder suspects. Like, regardless of the church situation, like, they might be responsible. They've had their own part to play in this. That there's fundamentalism fundamentalism, Mormonism involved in this. Like, he's like, there's something here, like, and we need to keep investigating it, because time and time again, the phrase of put the books on the shelves, it becomes pretty heavy. And after a while, like, even Alan, he kept trying to put books on the shelves of like any questions you have, just shelve them, just shelve them, just shelve them. And it's like, that's not an option anymore. Like, the shelving these questions is hindering this case, this murder investigation. Jeb is being kind of handcuffed and not asked. It's like he's being told not to ask the questions he's asking, because that can lead down a very serious and dirty route. But it's like, I guess it's like the community doesn't want their dirty laundry, their history that most people publicly doesn't know, because Jeb's like, I don't know anything about this, and he's learning about some of their church's dark history and perspective on things. Once again, his eyes are kind of open for the first time in a long time, seeing like, oh, like everything isn't copacetic. He can see like, oh, there's some stuff I don't agree about my religion. Like, what it brings to him is good, but some of the foundations of it he doesn't agree with, and it changed his perspective. Hearing Alan, who's kind of on the outside of it, kind of give his perspective, and now it's slowly shifting how Jeb views things. It's interesting because part of that, really quickly, his wife had, Rebecca had brought up, like, right, she doesn't like the way Jeb's mom talks in front of the kids sometimes. It's like, I get it, she's not she's not always the clearest minded, but I still don't like that. And it's like, can we go back to the conversation? Because it's like, right, no one, like, I can't calm her down like you can, Jeb. You have a special way of calming her down, but I can't do that when obviously you're not here. So can we go back to the conversation of medication? And I wonder, is it Jeb, considering like, right, my wife is doing everything and she's struggling, she needs my help? Or is it a combination of that plus a conversation he had with the bishop last episode, where the bishop was like, yeah, women need to be kind of medicated. And you're like, right, is that why he was kind of like a little hesitant about the medication thing? Maybe it's also because I think he's worried because his mom has some lucid days where she's still herself. And I think all that conversation with the bishop last episode, her wanting to die and everything, and him being like, no, you don't, we frown upon, only the Lord can decide when a life should be taken, when a life should be cut short. Any interference with that plan of when a life should end is you basically being blasphemous to what is essentially the Lord's laid out plan, essentially. So it turns into this, I'm wondering if that had some influence in that, why he was kind of hesitant. But he's like, right, let's look into the medication and see any side effects. And that's kind of where we left off there. Obviously, there's also the conversation about like, oh, the radio was talking about this murder and stuff. Like, oh, was it actually Satanists? And it's just kind of like, right, Jeb doesn't want to put that out there because he now knows there's more to it. Granted, he didn't know as much as he knows now before that whole thing got broadcast and stuff. So, but I love the revelation in this episode where it turns out the episode wasn't told in the exact order. It was told in a very misleading order to make you think like, oh, Dan was against Ron, but in actuality, Ron was able to convince Dan, and so the events weren't what you thought they were. First, Dan was told by their father, "Hey, try and convince Ron to back." Told Ron to try and convince Dan to back away from this perspective. He couldn't. In fact, once again, Dan convinced Ron. And so that's when you had the whole sheriff thing happen, and, him, on the megaphone talking to everybody. And then his dad, like, talked about, oh, I need to save you, and Ron was nearby. It's like, right. His dad interfered because Ron didn't do a good enough job persuading his brother. So it's like, right, I need to step in then. So when Ron got the... Because when Ron got the thing about like, oh yeah, your wife, she sent in this letter, don't be mad at her, she's just worried. Ron was already a part of this, and Diana wrote that letter not just about the others, she wrote it about Ron as well. And now it's like, oh, you're up here writing behind my back and sending it to the prophet, and now because of you, I can't get, because he got swept up in it, because it's like, right, his brothers didn't know at the time, because it's like, right, you're successful business, you're on your own. They didn't realize that that Ron was in kind of dire straits, that his business was kind of suffering, that he was kind of in a bad place, because it's like, right, they keep taking from you, and Robin was like, yeah, I'm struggling to make ends meet too, brother. But once again, they thought Ron was kind of better off, but now it's like, right, they keep taking from us, and they were able to convince Ron, and the guy who he fudged the story, and because Jeb and them confronted him the moment Robin was like, wait, your brother was able to convince Ron, and then they got the sequence of events into correct order because Robin clarified it for him. So they then went and confronted the guy who had received the letter, like the bishop had sent it to him, and he's the one that told Ron about it. He fudged things. Ron wasn't mad about Dan because they were on the same side. He was mad at Brenda. In fact, it looks like he straight up hit her in the car when he was just kind of like, she was like, honey, and he was like, don't. And the guy saw that and said nothing because, they didn't want, because Ron is kind of seen as the golden child. At the very least, he's the only one left, because I think he's kind of loved and stuff like that, but Dan was seen as kind of like the troublemaker. It's like, right, the church didn't want the golden child, Ron, to be shown that, he was slipping down the FLDS perspective on things as well. So to keep that public image, what did they do? They made it seem like, they wanted the public perception to be Ron was against this. He was still the golden child, but it's like, no, he was just as much a part of this as his brothers were. And so now the perspective is maybe he might have done something to Brenda and Diana, because they haven't been able to find Diana. And so there's a good chance he might have done something. Well, I think they can't find Diana or Matilda. And maybe he's the one that killed Brenda because, like, right, knowing that Brenda was at the heart of all of this too, like, maybe that's what he may have snapped. I don't think Ron did it, but I think everything played a role in the domino effects leading down this path. Like, Dan's perspective influenced Ron, and I think that all influenced their brother that's quiet. I still believe he's the one that did it. I've kind of been thinking that for a little while, but we'll end up seeing whether that ends up being the case or not. But the chief came back, and it's like, because they found out that at the bishop's house, there were two people sitting in a car. The car is the one that Ron owns, that green Impala. And so when their chief comes back and they bring like, okay, this is what's going on, their chief is like, no, we're not going to bring that up. We're going to steer away from bringing up anything fundamentalist Mormonism. We're not going to bring that into the public zeitgeist of the information. So they're keeping it vague about what the cops actually know. But when the time comes, Jeb says, no, like, they're like, right, do you think, because one of the reporters is like, do you think this is something satanic related or fundamentalist related or neither? It's a easy question. And he's like, I was curious. I was like, what's Jeb going to say? What's he going to say? And he says, we can't fully discount the possibility of this being fundamental Mormonism related. And I love Bill being like, excuse my language, but I am goddamn proud of you because you did the right thing. Like, our chief was trying to shut that down, but you did the right thing because the public deserves to know. Like, because it also flows with, like, right, he's had so much truth kind of hidden from him, and it was a situation, because I thought what's interesting, the moment his wife, like, was watching the press conference and she turned it off, like, she was kind of shaken by it. So I guess knowing, like, wait, there's people, like, that there may be some Mormonism, and this isn't just some satanic, like, outsiders that, once again, this is coming from the inside, kind of shakes the core of their beliefs. And obviously Jeb can't really rest, with his nerves kind of being shaken with everything going on, I think. And then what happens when they go to church, it's like, oh, hey, basically people are just kind of giving him that look like, hey, Jeb. So his family's kind of getting a little bit of that stink eye, I think, a little bit. But also his wife is like, so, hey, no, the lady's talking, being like, oh, yeah, you had 3 children. I was like, did they have a child and lose it? Because it did seem like the stake president came to, like, he was saying something about, like, right, I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically like, don't air dirty laundry because we know some of your secrets or something. And I guess it wasn't a publicly known thing that they lost a child or something, because she says 3 children and then like, oh, you have 2 beautiful girls. I think they lost a child because at one point after his conversation with the state president, Jeb had went to his office. It seemed like he was going to throw up, like he was in pain, and I think that's what it was. It's something they've kind of buried so long, and to have someone kind of throw it back in their face, and now it's like, right, you want to be reunited with your three beautiful children in heaven, so it's like, right, your daughters need to be baptized, so it's kind of like, all right, let's go with that. But I think Jeb's reluctancy in that was just everything going on, that it's like, right, the church isn't what he thought it was, especially with everything with the Laffertys, what's going on with Brenda's murder, that this being a symptom of something much more, something within their community that he was unaware of, or maybe at the very least he subconsciously turned a blind eye to. So I think that's going to be I think that's quite the interesting development on that front. Now it's just going to be like, right, trying to find Ron. And you had that one detective going, I forgot why he was in that area, but he ends up finding Bishop Lowe's. I thought, like, oh, this is going to end bad for him, but it's like, oh, so Bishop Lowe's here, so your place was tossed, but it's like, no one's been able to get in contact or find him and his family. Apparently, they've been kind of, it was like the day of the murder, so maybe Bishop Lowe has something. Well, like, the car was outside of their house. Not that he's been missing since then, but it was like, it was more so like, maybe the bishop I'm thinking that he talked to wasn't Lowe. I thought that was Bishop Lowe. Maybe I'm confusing those two bishops, but Bishop Lowe's, like, the car was in front of Bishop Lowe's house, like, the day of Brenda and the baby's murder. Baby Erica's murder. And now, so that's why it's like, he's been missing since then the entire time, right? So that's why I'm thinking, like, right, I'm confusing, like, Bishop Lowe isn't the one that Jeb went to talk to. That was a different bishop. So now there's like, Bishop Lowe seems like he's okay because it's just all fishing. It's like, okay, so once again, are you a part of this and you were kind of sent away so that you wouldn't be questioned about certain things? Were you being threatened? Like, what's going on there? So I'm very excited to see where things kind of take us from here, especially now that Jeb kind of crossed the line and, kind of went against his chief's orders and kind of goes like, yeah, there might be some fundamentalist Mormonism angles to this. So we'll see what that means publicly. Everything with Jeb and his family and where the investigation goes from here. Everything with the Laffertys. It's going to definitely be interesting. Because we are jumping around a lot. Because when we see now is like Brenda's like very showing a lot. So it's definitely been a while since like the previous episode because she wasn't really showing at the time. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.